The Hawaiian Islands are famous for their beaches, waves, and beautiful volcanic mountains. While many see them as paradise, scientists know them as something much darker, the extinction capital of the world. Hawaii has more extinct or endangered species than any other place its size. Shockingly, most of the environmental damage in Hawaii can be traced back to just one man, William Herbert Purvis. But before delving into the details of this ecological crisis, let's transport ourselves to the pristine paradise that the Hawaiian Islands once were. Imagine a chain of volcanic islands emerging from the blue Pacific, about 3,700 kilometers from the nearest continent. They're so remote that only animals capable of flying or swimming such distances made it there. Hawaii became a realm dominated by birds. It was a peaceful habitat, devoid of terrestrial predators, with only bats and seals. Plants didn't need thorns or toxins for defense. Birds nested confidently on the ground. There were no reptiles, mosquitoes, or even cockroaches. But then, about 800 years ago, a superior predator appeared in paradise: humans. Polynesian navigators arrived on the shores, bringing chickens, rats, and their axes. They began to cut down trees and settle in the no-man's land. Soon, the exotic feathers of the birds became crucial to Hawaiian culture. They adorned instruments, war standards, and chief cloaks. But the islanders didn't kill the birds. They only plucked a few feathers. Thus, initially, the human impact was minimal. It was truly their involuntary stowaways, the rats, that began to disrupt the local ecosystem, preying mainly on the land birds. While the Hawaiian ecosystem suffered from human arrival, the situation stabilized over time. The natives had nowhere else to expand, so they tried to preserve nature of the islands. But then came the commercial interests of the West. To maintain their independence, Hawaiian kings allowed European and American investors to build huge sugarcane plantations. By 1880, it had become the island's most important industry. And though the natives had managed to adapt to their new home, the influx of settlers and plantations would forever alter the fragile balance. You see, for the economic interests of Westerners to succeed, the entire plantation work relied heavily on controlling the rat infestation they had brought. This is where the figure of William Herbert Purvis emerges. In 1878, when an ambitious 20-year-old landed in Hawaii with grand dreams, born in faraway England, but was determined to carve out a future in the tropical paradise. Alongside his family, Purvis was among the first foreign investors on the Big Island of Hawaii, establishing a sugar mill on lands that once belonged to King Lunalilo. The sugarcane plantations flourished under the tropical sun. Then, in 1882, after a trip to Australia, Purvis introduced macadamia seeds to the islands. For many years, they were only planted as ornamental trees, but eventually, they became a very significant crop in Hawaii. Today, the macadamia industry in the islands generates $175 million annually. Purvis seemed destined to be remembered as a visionary, bringing prosperity to the islands with his exotic crops. But his ambition would lead him to make a fateful mistake, unleashing an ecological crisis from which Hawaii's fragile ecosystem would never recover. By 1883, Purvis had too much money invested in the islands. His sugar and nut plantation were really paying off. Literally. But he and other investor farmers shared a common enemy: rats. This plague was eating into their profits, and that couldn't be allowed. So Purvis devised what he believed would be a brilliant solution. He decided to import voracious mongooses from India, known for their ability to kill almost any opponent. Convinced they would rid the plantations of rats, Purvis released mongooses into his fields, with other plantation owners to follow suit on more estates. Purvis thought his plan was as ingenious as when he introduced macadamias a year earlier. But he didn't anticipate a serious problem. Mongooses don't only devour rats, but also consume everything else in their path. In their native India, mongooses primarily fed on insects, rats, and snakes. But like any hungry animal, they preferred easy prey. So yes, mongooses hunted some rats, but they weren't their favorite dish. The reason was something so simple that it's incredible nobody had thought of it before. Rats come out at night, and mongooses hunt during the day. Simply put, their schedules didn't allow them to meet to do the job they were there for. So, it was easier for them to steal eggs from unsuspecting birds than to chase swift rodents. Soon, the mongoose population grew exponentially, becoming a plague itself, threatening native bird populations. They raided nests, devoured chicks, and even unearthed turtle eggs buried in the sand. Ground nesting birds were the hardest hit. By the early 20th century, the local newspaper reported that pheasants and larks were practically extinct. What did the businessmen say? Well, they basically lied and washed their hands of the matter. They responded with columns claiming that the decision to bring mongooses was a great success. As for the news that mongooses were killing birds, they hardly paid attention, they simply didn't care. Most of the time, the headlines focused on humorous stories describing how mongooses stole chickens. But while the businessmen counted their profits, the mongooses continued to kill. Among their victims was the majestic Hawaiian goose, whose population dwindled from 25,000 individuals in 1778 to just 30 individuals in 1952. But it wasn't just the mongooses. Wildcats, brought by early explorers, also decimated the unsuspecting ground birds. And decades earlier, mosquitoes introduced on ships began spreading deadly diseases, such as avian malaria, to which the local birds had no immunity. Oh, and one more thing. Remember what I said about local bird keepers simply plucking a bird and then letting it go? Do you think they continued that kind of ceremony when these guys got European firearms? Of course not. As a result, the Hawaiian Islands became the world capital of bird extinction. Out of the 142 unique species that once inhabited Hawaii, 95 have become extinct. Of the few remaining, 33 are critically endangered. Some haven't been sighted for decades, likely extinct forever. The Hawaiian paradise had turned into a nightmare for its endemic birds. Fortunately, after experiencing the worst consequences, measures were taken. In 1888, King Kamehameha V established the kingdom's first plant quarantine, seeking to prevent the introduction of new pests and diseases. 2 years later, importing insects was prohibited, and by 1905, no new animals could enter the islands. Still, it was already too late to remedy centuries of inconsiderate human intervention in the fragile Hawaiian ecosystem. The damage was done. Today, local organizations strive to conserve the remaining bird populations. One successful example is the Hawaiian goose. In the 1950s, a breeding and dispersal program for these birds was initiated, helping the species lose its endangered status. The population now stands at around 2,500 individuals. A piece of good news amidst the darkness. Other birds being rescued include 2 species of Hawaiian honeycreepers, the akikiki and akiki, small birds that inhabit the forest canopy and, as their name suggests, feed on the nectar of tropical flowers. Scientists at the San Diego Zoo have managed to hatch half a dozen chicks in captivity, raising hopes that the birds may fly back from the brink of extinction. Of course, when Purvis unleashed hungry mongooses across the Big Island, he only hoped to rid himself of pesky rats threatening his profits. He never imagined he was unleashing an ecological crisis that would forever disrupt the delicate natural balance of the Hawaiian Islands. But that's exactly what happened. The tragedy is that similar scenarios have repeated themselves time and again as humans have colonized pristine habitats. We arrive seeking wealth, transforming entire landscapes to suit our interests. Rarely do we imagine, let alone care about, the consequences for native ecosystems until it's too late. Ignorance and complacency can be just as destructive as malice. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to see more documentaries from Inside Influencer.